Hi, I'm Steve Clemons, and I have a question. Is Joe Biden's foreign policy going to get captured by America's famous military industrial complex, or is he somehow going to steer clear? Let's get to the bottom line. Here's what President-elect Joe Biden has already said he wants to do. He wants to think about global warming as if it's a national security threat and rejoin the Paris Accords. He wants to reduce the number of U.S. troops in Afghanistan and make a new nuclear deal with Iran. The Biden doctrine is traditional and realistic. Engage with foreign leaders, the good and the bad, and make responsible deals with them. But American progressives who played a very big role in getting him elected are worried that America will keep doing what it usually does: embrace dictators, promote oil over renewable energy, accept Israel's abandonment of a two-state peace process with Palestine, and keep spending more on the military. So what are Biden's progressive critics hoping for in the next 4 years? And what would a progressive U.S. foreign policy look like? We're talking today with Yasmine Taeb, a senior fellow at the Center for International Policy and senior policy counsel at Demand Progress, where they've been working with a coalition of progressive grassroots movements all over the United States, urging President-elect Biden to, quote, adopt a more principled foreign policy. Yasmine, thank you so much for joining us today. Let's start at the beginning. You and your allies out there have gone out to identify 100 what you view as outstanding foreign policy thinkers, national security policy practitioners, and suggest to the Biden-Kamala Harris team that it ought to bring a number of these people into the administration. Who are these people and why were they selected?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, for the opportunity to speak with you today, Steve, about some of the work that my colleagues and I have been doing to try to influence the Biden-Harris team in ensuring that we get, key progressives in national security and foreign policy positions. And these are candidates that are forward-thinking, talented, qualified, diverse, and they are committed to ensuring that the U.S. that we take a fundamental shift in U.S. foreign policy, that we're committed to ending our endless wars and working to cut our bloated Pentagon budget. These are individuals that, again, collectively, dozens and dozens of organizations came together to support and recommend these candidates. And we feel very confident that, the candidates that we put forth, again, have no, revolving door issues or concerns. They are free of corporate ties. These are individuals that have, again, been, active in the advocacy world or, have been working on similar issues on Capitol Hill. And they would be phenomenal candidates for the Biden team. And the reason we put that forth was to simply show that there is this organized and coordinated effort by the left to put up an alternative list of talented and forward-thinking, progressives and candidates for key positions in the administration.
When I think of some of the names we know now, like Anthony Blinken as the nominee for Secretary of State, or Avril Haines for Director of National Intelligence, we have Lloyd Austin, who's a bit different, former general as Secretary of Defense, and Jake Sullivan as the National Security Advisor. So how would you characterize the gap or the difference between some of the candidates that you're putting forward and that cluster of appointees?
Yeah, so as you probably have seen, that the vast majority of kind of the key folks that have been nominated or appointed by the Biden-Harris team to national security positions were pretty active in similar capacities in the Obama administration. So they're what we call, they've been part of kind of this national security establishment apparatus. And what we're really hoping to do is that, that President-elect Joe Biden understands that this is a unique opportunity that we're in. It's that he seizes on this moment to ensure that, the campaign promises that he made to progressives and to the grassroots throughout the entire campaign, that he lives up to it. He a number of our organizations had a regular engagement with the Biden team on foreign policy issues throughout the campaign, and they were committed to not only supporting our efforts to finally end our endless wars. They listened to our concerns about a host of other issues we spoke to them about prioritizing human rights and in our foreign policy, again, making sure that we're not aligning ourselves with countries that are systematically abusing, the human rights violations, that we're not providing arms or assistance to these countries. And they also listen to our concerns about our personnel recommendations and what we find unacceptable, really, and the sort of folks that they should be elevating in the administration.
And Yasmine, I remember when I was back at the New America Foundation many years ago, and at the start of the Obama administration, our foreign policy program at that time had 3 cores. And we said, look, if you're going to push reset and send a different signal to the world, normalize, to some degree relations with Cuba, push a credible Israeli-Palestinian 2-state solution that was real. And third, kick open that door with Iran and negotiate a different direction. And so this was before it was commonplace to even think about some of those terms, particularly Cuba and Iran. And so many of the people in your group were ones I worked with. But what I've realized over time is that the avant-garde move can become the conventional one. And many people in the Obama-Biden administration became fans of doing an Iran nuclear deal, as I think many of your progressive groups are. But how do you handle the shifts in what is conventional versus and perhaps controlled by the military-industrial complex at some level versus those that are in the square that progressives would generally support? Because I've seen with time that those lines shift a bit.
Yeah, so I think as you noted, Biden has made it very clear that he is committed to rejoining JCPOA, and that's one of the very key kind of, I would say, top 3 priorities for progressives. And in terms of other commitments that we're trying to get from the incoming Biden administration is, we're hoping that in the first 100 days, we're hoping in addition to some of the key priorities that you mentioned, in addition to rejoining JCPOA, is that there's an immediate end to U.S. military support on weapons sales to countries that are part of the Saudi-led military intervention in Yemen. We are hoping that there's a clear indication that Biden will support a repeal of the 2001-2002 AUMFs, and that he would support war powers legislation that is going to be coming through Congress to reaffirm Congress's authority.
And not to interrupt, but just for my audience, I wanted to just say that what you wanted to see was a repeal of the authorization for use of military force that was set up in 2001. I just wanted to, is that correct?
Correct, both of them, 2001 and 2002.
Please go ahead. Yeah.
Correct. And, in addition to supporting, war powers reform legislation that we anticipate coming through Congress in the next couple months, we, are calling on the Biden administration to, again, as noted, prioritize human rights in our foreign policy with a particular focus on countries that the U.S. has both leverage and a moral responsibility due to our provision of military or economic aid, and making sure that there's an immediate year-long moratorium on U.S. weapons sales and foreign military assistance to countries that don't meet that standard for human rights, and they're committing mass atrocities. And finally, a key priority for our organizations for I don't know how long has been, calling for the bloated defense budget to be cut. So this modest proposal that all of our, the vast majority of our organizations supported, which, as you probably know, was championed by Senator Sanders and also Representatives Lee and Pocan in the House, was a provision that called for a 10% cut. And that simply would bring the top line for the Pentagon budget to what was previously in the Obama administration. I mean, many of our organizations are certainly calling for a greater cut, but that's something that we are hoping that we can get some sort of commitment from the Biden administration, and that's something that our organizations are heavily going to be advocating on as well.
Can you articulate for us what your groups and your allies think about the Israel-Palestine situation now, because Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has been shining a spotlight of many traditional human rights watch organizations and nonprofits. There's already been a major impact on UNRWA's funding, for instance, dealing with Palestine issues, and undermining essentially a lot of the traditional groups that have been watching the Israeli occupation of Palestinian territories. Where is your group on what needs to happen to that? And I should say, you know, with the Abraham Accords and with normalization of relations between Israel and many other Arab states led by the UAE, I think part of the question is, will there be any leverage down the road? What would you like to see Biden do down the road when it comes to Palestine?
Yeah, so, you know, that's a great question, and it's something that many of our organizations, it's a top priority for a lot of our organizations. And when we're talking about the U.S. not, you know, providing assistance or arms to countries that are systematically violating human rights, I think we obviously need to have Israel in mind in terms of the asks that we've made of the Biden administration. I can tell you that this letter that I worked on when I was at Demand Progress that we sent to the Biden team in May, and we're doing some follow-ups on that letter, and that was a letter that was signed by over 50 national organizations. And our ask was that, you know, the U.S. should work to build a future in which all Palestinians and Israelis obviously live in full equality, by upholding, again, a foreign policy that centers human rights and dignity for all people. And we specifically called on the Biden administration to use a combination of pressure and incentives, including leveraging the annual $3.8 billion in U.S. military assistance that's provided to Israel, and to get all parties to come to an agreement that upholds UN Security Council resolutions and international law. I mean, specifically, we called on, you know, ending Israel's military occupation, disbanding Israel's illegal settlements in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, ending the Israeli military blockade of Gaza, and ending all attacks on civilians, be they Israeli or Palestinian. So that collectively has been our ask, and you know, that's an issue that has been pretty challenging, you know, to get key commitments on, and it's an issue that will continue to be part of the progressive foreign policy platform moving forward.
Yasmine, I admire you because I know how hard it is to essentially be the spokesperson for a group of cats. They may not all swim together, operate together, see things together, but you raise some interesting questions, both, you know, about, you know, the classic conflict between interests and human rights. And you have some real realists in the group. Paul Pillar, whom I've known for years on Iran, is someone I would say is not as classically organized around human rights concerns, but he is a shrewd calculator of American interests. So you've got different impulses essentially under one umbrella. When it comes to countries like Turkey and the leader there, Erdogan, when it comes to North Korea, which I read in your principles, you give the Trump administration some credit for diplomatic progress there. I'm just sort of interested in how you manage those lines where someone like me is saying, I haven't seen diplomatic progress with North Korea. I've seen, you know, appeasement of a lot of bad behavior. So how do you square those lines in a way that you keep your coalition together, but you also make progress in getting this viewpoint, as you define it, into the Biden team?
Right. And I think, you know, the way we've been able to do that was because kind of the underlying framework or theme that has been at the core of whether it was the principles letter that you mentioned, or even, you know, the personnel book that we organized and sent to the transition team, has been ensuring that we support principles that call for the U.S. to end our endless wars and support a fundamental shift in U.S. foreign policy. And that means supporting more restraint and ensuring that, again, that we're prioritizing kind of domestic needs and meeting the concerns of our community members, as opposed to using resources to, further kind of increase this again, the bloated defense budget that we keep talking about. And I think the reason why we've been successful in being able to work with many organizations that, frankly, don't consider themselves to be progressive, right? So the Quincy Institute, as you've noted, is a significant partner of ours, and Quincy gets funding from the right and the left, but their key mission has been, and they were a huge partner actually in the book, the personnel book that we sent to the transition team, and supported and recommended several of their own staff members for appointments. And again, the reason for that collaboration is because we all want the Biden team to understand that we want them to support this vision of military restraint and understand that the way we've been operating in the past few decades hasn't been serving our interest or our allies. So ensuring that those priorities are addressed with the administration, ensuring that we have key folks that are going to be advancing those objectives is what we've been trying to do.
I read John Bolton's White House memoir recently, In the Room Where It Happened. And in that memoir, the Trump's national security advisor, John Bolton, says that he's opposed any longer to any general being appointed to the Secretary of Defense spot. And he was referring in that case to Jim Mattis. Joe Biden has come in and appointed four-star General Lloyd Austin. Right. Do you share the concerns John Bolton does about military leadership in that traditionally civilian role?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of our organizations absolutely have concerns around that. And, right now, many of our allies are drafting sample questions to send to the Senate and leading up to his confirmation hearing. And my understanding is that we do have a number of key senators that have, publicly have said that they would not support providing that waiver to General Austin. And I think those are legitimate concerns. And there is kind of this difference of opinion, you can say, in terms of General Austin's appointment, because some saw it as, being better than the alternatives, right? The alternatives were Flournoy, which many of our organizations were, let's just say, not happy about that prospect. And a number of our allies see General Austin's, nomination as someone who, he has publicly exhibited in different scenarios where he has wanted to pull back U.S. troops and supported restraint. So I think that was kind of a welcomed approach to some of our allies. So
what does success look like for you, Yasmine, in the sense that I would wager we probably won't see someone from Move On as Secretary of Defense, right? So I recognize there are choices out there. But I think that when you sort of look at it, is the goal to be in the room and to be heard? Is the goal to impact policy? Have the folks that you've talked to, the 100, and you have an outstanding list: Paul Pillar, Joe Cirincione, one of the country's great nuclear experts, Trita Parsi, a great Iran expert, and others. Very, very impressive group of people. But I also wonder, the question is, what if they're in the room and they get voted down? That happens a lot in government, that they're in the room, they're heard, but policy doesn't go their direction. So what does success look like for you?
Yeah, and that's a great example is we don't just want some token picks, right? We don't want just maybe 2 or 3 of our picks to be appointed and put in different offices in the administration. And you're right, and for their voices not to be heard and for them to be voted down. And the idea is obviously to try to get as many friendly and allied voices together and to get as many of them in the same room as possible. For that reason, precisely, is strength is in numbers, and we do understand that what we put forth is a pipeline, is a talent pipeline. And, these are individuals that if they are appointed in the Biden administration, they will be in a great position to, in 4 years to be nominated for potentially a cabinet position themselves. So, and that's been our kind of outlook in putting this project together. And we're hoping that the Biden administration understands that we will try to push to get as many forward-looking and talented and diverse candidates in these positions as possible.
Yasmine, how have they been responding to you? I know that in the economic portfolio, there's been some applause that they have brought in an economic progressive onto their National Economic Advisory team. Gautam Raghavan, who I admit is a friend of mine, has just been announced as a deputy in the Office of Personnel Management, and he's a real progressive out there, LGBT leader. So I guess my question is, on the foreign policy and national security front, have they budged at all?
So they knew the book was coming, and the transition team reached out once they saw the first kind of news story about it, and they've received the book right now. From what I've gathered, they've taken the recommendations seriously and will be following up with them in the next couple weeks. In terms of, do we know right now if they are going to be nominating any of our recommendations? It's unclear, but that's something for us to follow up with in the next couple weeks. And yeah.
Well, let me ask you another question. A lot of the folks that you have in your circuit were those that were hopeful of Bernie Sanders or an Elizabeth Warren, someone from the progressive wing of the party, winning this nomination. So Joe Biden wins. You're trying to impact that. But there's been a lot of criticism that the Biden team has not reached out more to the Warren and Sanders crowd before this. And I know you're pushing that. But I guess at a personal level, because I know you're working hard on this, I can feel it. You're one of the gurus behind the scenes on it. Are you disappointed or are you hopeful?
Hopeful, and that's because, and Matt Duss and I speak pretty frequently, as you know, and he's someone that we've also obviously recommended for a key appointment in the Biden administration.
I should mention that Matt Duss is the senior policy advisor for foreign affairs to Senator Bernie Sanders.
Correct. Yes. And, throughout the campaign, the series of calls that we were having with Tony Blinken and the rest of the Biden foreign policy team, so Matt was part of those efforts to ensure that the Biden team was reaching out to progressives and that they were listening to our concerns, right? At a minimum, what we appreciated was that platform was available to us, that they had these kind of regular 6-week calls with a handful of groups, and we were able to raise our concerns during those calls, and we're hopeful that now that they understand that we're going to be holding them accountable to some of those campaign promises and commitments that they made to progressives. So I'm hopeful. But yeah, so we'll see how it goes.
Well, Yasmine Taeb, senior fellow at the Center for National Policy, guru of the Progressive 100, we'll call it. I should say, and I want my viewers to know, that it is very hard in this town to find institutions, to find think tanks, to find nonprofits, to find positions in the private that have not somehow become part of the military funding complex. Yeah. And so, if nothing else, it's impressive that you found 100 people alive, not in those networks. So, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us today, Yasmine. Thank you.
Absolutely. Good luck. Thank you. Thanks.
So what's the bottom line? Is America really standing at a crossroads? Is it time for a clean break with the past? To rethink foes and friends based on human rights and enlightened national interest? My guest is right that there should be people in government who are not afraid of thinking outside the box and saying so. But my guess is that Biden will do what presidents are supposed to do. get smart people from most, if not all, perspectives in the room, and start to rebuild America's credibility and global influence after the disruption of America First. And that's the bottom line.